introduce our speaker.
Okay, hello everyone, good evening. We are delighted to have mud mason Becky Little, the founder of Rebearth, with us today. Her background as a traditional builder using stone, earth and lime led her to set up this practice, which takes away the focus of heritage as something in need of preservation and rather something to be carried into contemporary context. Rebearth is the only specialist earth building company in Scotland, and they have been repairing and conserving Scottish vernacular mud and lime buildings for almost 30 years. Through that, Little is helping to highlight Scotland's rich, but largely forgotten history of earth buildings. However, heritage with Rebearth isn't just about the physical manifestation of form, it is also about the social practice of craft construction. Through her work, she helps keep alive the skills themselves, rather than just the individual buildings, which is arguably more intrinsic with cultural heritage, yet have been even harder to preserve. In an architectural age of standardization and uniformity, Becky reintroduces uncertainty into the process and showcases the joy and beauty that uncertainty can bring into the construction. She creates with nature rather than against it, embracing it and showcasing what practices see as an uncomfortable truth of humanity in architecture. Through her work, she highlights the fluidity of the local environment, incorporating, for instance, the wings of a butterfly into plaster at the end of summer. And through that process, she creates a more intimate experience and increased care for the surrounding ecosystem of the built structure. Through Rebearth, Becky is importantly allowing for a sharing of knowledge, which stands in contrast to an industry that has a tendency to be protective of design. With the School of Mud, which is part of Rebearth, a holistic teaching approach is introduced to people of all ages and stages of life. We are delighted to have Becky Little share this knowledge further tonight. But first, I'd just like to quickly introduce the Padlet that Aoife was mentioning just before. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see this. So this is the Padlet that we'll be using this evening. To your left, you can see some links relating to Rebearth and Becky Little's work. Any questions or comments that you have throughout the talk today, you can answer or rather ask them here. And we've also started a resources link. So if you have any resources that you can think of that are relevant to the discussion today, you can just add your own resources to this column here. And lastly, we would like to ask a question, which is, what material do you associate with your local area? And you can answer this question at any point during this talk. And you can also ask questions in this column at any point as well, but we will be discussing them after Becky Little has had her presentation. But for now, I'm going to let Becky Little take the Zoom.
Okay. Wow, that was some introduction. I don't know how to follow that. Oh, let me get it here. I'm not able to share my screen at the moment, which is odd because we did it so well before. There we go. Can you see that now?
Yeah,
yes,
that looks
you.
good.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I had a little tear. It was so lovely. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about my approach to building, my approach to life and art, and we will just look at some pictures and see where we end up. And I'd be really interested to hear from people about how they relate the things I talk about to identity, because that was in a way the little challenge that I had was that was the theme of this talk. And intrinsically, well, identity is everything to do with everything that I do, but yeah, we'll see what you think at the end. We'll come back to that. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I became a builder back in the early 90s and really didn't plan it at all. I ended up at art college and I was hoping to stay with the art, but for one reason or another, it didn't work out. And I just wanted to be outside and to work with nature, really. I guess that was my route in. And I travelled to Scotland and got a job on a building site, and the rest is history to some degree. But yeah, so that's where it begins. And then quite a bit later, I made myself a business called Rebearth, which is all about earth building. But there's quite a bit of a story before we get to that. And then in recent times, it's more about training and teaching and sharing the knowledge that I've got. So just wanted to make that clear, that I've been on a bit of a journey of concentrating on myself and then wanting to share. So this is the very beginning. I arrived in Scotland and I started to work on incredible masonry structures, doing lime harling. And it was almost medieval. We were slaking lime, and I hope some of you know this process. You make these hot vats of bubbling white liquid, and then making mortars and repairing things like Brodie Castle. And even at that stage, so although I'd, for lots of reasons, given up on art, even there, back in those buildings, it was as if the surfaces and the textures were my way of expressing myself in these kind of patterns that you see. And then quite by chance, I was asked if I would be interested in becoming a mason for earth buildings. There was nobody in Scotland. It was a lost tradition. Anyone that knew about it had gone. And so I was literally approached by somebody from Historic Environment Scotland, Bruce Walker, and he asked me if I would like to repair some Scottish earth buildings. And of course, none of these are in Scotland, but this was what I imagined when somebody said to me, do you want to work with earth? It was sort of very exotic and far away. But in fact, this was the first building I ever got my hands on. And it's a little building near Perthshire called Cottown. And that you can tell how old that picture is because it's really sort of scrappy looking. But the one on the left is the before we did the work, and the one on the right is the after the repairs. And I'll go a little bit into the detail of that. But you can see on the left there's an old window that's been filled up, and the brilliant thing about that window is it was pointing down the road, and you could tell that whoever lived there had made their window perfectly aligned with the passing traffic, so they could see exactly was coming to visit them. So it's starting to see these old buildings with the stories that they can tell, and see in fact, something I didn't mention was I also studied archaeology as one of my subjects after art college, and so unraveling these buildings so that we can really learn about them from their materials and their stories is something I'm really interested in. So if you're interested, there is quite a lot of literature about earth structures in Scotland, and this one is online, and you can get hold of it. If you just put in that title into Google, you'll find it. But earth traditions anywhere are this mixture of the land, the geology, how soils have changed over time. It's always about climate, and often very localized climate that's important, and then the result is earth and culture. But in Scotland, it's so hidden that you really, most of the time, you would have no idea it's even there. So Scottish earth buildings, they use many different materials and techniques. And what's wonderful about being an earth builder in Scotland is this incredible diversity of materials. So you see that on the left, this section, it's got turf at the top, it's got subsoil, it's got rock, and all of those things can go into buildings. And on the right, the soil map shows this incredible diversity of soil types. And every soil type in every local area is suitable for building with in different ways. So it's about this really knowing place, really getting involved in the place that you're in to understand what you can do with the materials. And then, of course, as I said, weather is always an issue. And I couldn't really understand how an earth building wasn't going to melt in Scotland. It's like, well, why doesn't it just wash away? So it doesn't make sense, especially on the West Coast. But as you'll see, there are ways to work with it. And here's the kind of obvious rule it's the earth builder's mantra is you always need a good hat and a good pair of boots. The hat needs to get the water away from the structure, and the boots is you see that little stone wall at the base of that building. That lifts it out of the splash and the damp zone to keep it in good condition for hundreds of years quite often. And actually, this was something I was writing today because I'm actually preparing another lecture for next week, and it's all about cob. And I imagine a lot of you have heard of the word cob. It's the most well-known kind of earth building, and it's been on grand designs, and you hear it all over the place. But the thing that I like to sort of get into is that in every different area of a country, there is going to be different words, even for that one way of working. So cob is called clom in Wales, it's mud wall where I live, clay wall in Aberdeenshire, clay biggins, mud in Ireland, dabbin. So you see, there's all these different names, and the names aren't talking about the same thing. I mean, roughly it's the same thing, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, but it's this incredible richness in language, but also in technology and in culture that I love it, and I want to hold on to it, and it's so special. So here we are, mud wall or cob. And when we talk about mud wall, it's that kind of building where you take a sticky soil, a subsoil, you mix it with water and fiber of some sort, and you put it in layers. And I'll show some pictures of us doing it to make it more clear. But in Scotland, nearly always it's like that fish and chip shop. You cannot see it. It's behind renders from later periods, or quite often it's behind brickwork as well. So it's very often hidden, but when it's not hidden, that picture on the left is what you see. And here's some more mud wall. In fact, I think the top left picture is actually a Cumbrian Dabbins, but never mind, we're not far from Cumbria. So you can see, just looking from those pictures, the soils are different colors, there's stones in some of them, and the quality of it really varies from place to place, but basically it is a mixture of mud and straw. And many years of my career have been repairing these buildings and working out how to look after them. And often the building itself will kind of tell you what it needs. Can you hear a noise? Because my dog is playing with something. Is it distracting you? Or is it okay? No, it's all right, good. I can just hear it. So the picture on the left, that was a collapse of a piece of wall. It's an old farmhouse near Perthshire. And that was probably caused by a small drip coming from a blocked gutter over probably a decade or so. So this is just to make the point that you can look after the earth by having a good roof, but if your roof is defective in any way, you can have these quite sort of dramatic events where things just suddenly fall. But fortunately, we were able to do a repair, and the top right is making mud bricks or mud blocks to stitch back that wall to make it whole again. And making mud bricks is a very good way for repairing, because they're pre-shrunk, dried materials, so they're strong and stable to give you structure. But most of our repairs have involved taking away cement. And I don't know if that's something that this group has covered, but there's so much inappropriate materials put on old buildings that often create lots of problems. So we take it away. So there's a little bit of a view inside that repair, and there I am with my arms stuck right into the wall, and that is a rat run. Often these buildings, not in recent times, but when they were inhabited, they might have rats living in them. It's not really a problem if you look after a building and you have it well maintained, but as these buildings fell out of use, they would quite often get infested with all sorts of creatures. So that I would be filling that hole up to make it good. And then the one below is got a skin of bricks attached to it, which was a later addition, and that's us fixing that. So lots of different ways you can repair these buildings. But what I absolutely love is this kind of looking at the detail And again, everywhere you go, there's slightly different tools that are being used and slightly different ways of working the materials. So it's because there's nobody there to tell me, in Scotland anyway, you're sort of discovering how the thing has been built by staring very hard at what you can see. So at the top right, I think, well, okay, I think they're using an agricultural fork, a garden fork of some sort. Bottom left, honestly, I don't really know what that tool is, but it's something that's been hitting a wall of mud when it's damp but not really wet, because you can tell the way it's imprinting. And so you really get a feel for how they're working these things. Top left, a smaller pronged tool of some sort, probably just to make a key for the plaster. And this is how we mix, many different ways, but if we sort of go back in time, it's probably feet and cows and horses. And of course in India, they're still often mixing in this way using cows. But I sort of imagine it to be maybe in a farmyard, and you might dump your sticky soil in the yard, and then the horses probably wander backwards and forwards, and they're going to poo in it and add all sorts of wonderful ingredients that may help your wall in the long term. But coming back to sort of modern times, and I'm a great believer in sort of working low tech, but actually, if you're going to build an entire building and it's sort of 50 tons of mud, it's actually makes sense to get the biggest digger you can for half a day and just mix the whole lot in one day. It's very, very efficient. So, you know, now and again, I will bring in a digger and we'll work that way. But it depends. If you've got lots of people, then of course you can work together as a sort of community. So here's various pictures of ways of working the mud. And you can see we have, again, like I said, this sort of pair of boots is this little stone wall that takes you out of the damp. And then you're literally lifting this sort of mix of mud and straw on top of the wall. And I tend to work standing on top of it. So your body weight is squashing the layer and compressing it and compacting it. And then I'll have a fork in my hand, and you saw all those buildings with fork marks. The fork is how you shape it at the surface. Bottom right, that's a French person working with mud. They have a special, they call it a cob saw. In fact, it's called la bouge, is cob in France, but they have this lovely tool that cuts the mud to shape it. And bottom left is how you do it in Devon. So you have a much longer fork and you use the back of your foot. So again, it's so varied. And probably I've invented new ways that weren't historic as well, just because that's what happens. You know, traditions never stand still. Now, this is I'm some kind of, that's my dog, I'm so sorry. Tom, can you take the dog away, please? So coming back to a different technique now, which is called Daub. And this is the same squishy modern straw, but this time it's on a frame of some sort. And so top left is a lovely old loft in Cromarty, upright posts and horizontal rope of some sort, handmade rope. Bottom left is what I would call a hanging lum. I'm from Yorkshire, so my Scottish, although I've been here for 30 years, it's still a bit Yorkshire. But basically it's like a canopy that goes over a chimney. And that one's made of, again, of oat. No, in fact, that one was heather rope with sort of the modern clay attached to it. And the bottom right is an internal wall inside a very high status stone building. So this, again, this hidden heritage is often inside much more high status buildings made of masonry. And you really have to know it's there. You might not see it. So that's Daub. And this is sort of various daubs happening in workshops where you've got woven willow, hazel, down the bottom chestnut. Lots of different materials can be used to make the frame. It really doesn't matter. So that's not load bearing. And then the other thing that we often find, which is just wonderful, is prints of hands, fingers, feet, you know, dogs' paws, old shoes. these buildings just contain all this wealth of beautiful history. The first one I ever worked on, that date on the top right, which I don't know if you can tell, it's 1818. It's literally somebody with their finger has put a date on the chimney. And the bottom left one was, when I worked it out, it was somebody's thumb, and they were making a key for the later plaster in the Daub section. And I could tell it was a right-handed, probably a man, because it was a massive thumb, and the direction told me it was a right-hander. So it's like, it's great work. Oh, and the foot, bottom right, was a size 5. So is it a child? Is it people pressing the floor with their feet? I suspect with that one, it was just some teenager running through the building site, getting shouted at, probably. So that was Daub. I'm just sort of scooting through the various ways of working with earth, and you get a sense of the variety. So earth it can just be a mortar to stick masonry together. And we have Roman clay ruins in Cramond, top left. Bottom left, I honestly can't remember which one, but in Orkney, prehistoric monuments that have clay as mortar. Aberdeenshire, bottom right, and then top right is more Lanark Longhouse in Perthshire. And when you look behind, again, later coatings, or often these things can be finished in lime, you see the earth behind. And this is our most common Scottish earth technique, is earth mortars, everywhere once you get an eye for it. And again, we've been fixing it in various places, sometimes with rubs on, because you've got your hand deep into a wall. It's like being a dentist, I think. It's like filling cavities with rubber gloves on. And all of this is just clay dug from the local fields. And then floors and plaster, many different ways of making coatings on floors and walls. And the first one I ever did was the bottom right with a massive pounding piece of wood. It was an absolute killer. These days I would tend to make a floor with a wetter material that I would use with a trowel. And not much earth plaster remaining out there historically, but you do see it here and there. That top left was in Cromarty. This is just a little example. I so love this place. It's Scallon Mill, which is in Moray, up in Moray near Tomintoul. And this building, we were working on it last year, and it had the most incredible beaten earth floor. And it was so soft, but so strong at the same time. That's always the conundrum with earth. It's sort of, it can be really durable, but it's very forgiving as well. And basically they just dug the soil from under the building. In this case, it was just raw soil pounded in place. And I worked that out just by looking very hard and doing samples and testing it. And I could get 2 different not clay, there was not even clay in this case. There was a teeny bit of clay in it, but it was just sand and silt and other things. And one side of the building, there's this brownish color, and on the other side of the building, there's a grayish color. And lo and behold, in the floor itself, when we come to really analyze it, it's both types in different phases. So just from under your feet and working out the best way of repairing. And then in another part of the building, cobblestones, again, really close by, set in the same soil as the beaten earth floor. And this building was full of graffiti, which is a whole other story. Island traditions. So what's wonderful about in the islands, you get these composite buildings with stone skins, earth in the center, turf on the wall heads. And you see that gutter top right made of clay. It's just a beautiful gutter lined with clay. So they're so good at using what they have. And turf building is another common, well, it was common, it's not common now, but the landscape is covered in fragments of turf walls. And then, of course, these techniques, when people left Scotland during the clearances, they took those techniques with them, and then they adapted them to this bottom right is a Nebraskan sod building. So that arrives in the States, and probably the people there may have seen indigenous buildings too, and maybe it becomes a combination. Who knows? There's a whole PhD to be done there at some point. And then turf roofs in Orkney. And it took me a long time to work out exactly how to do these buildings, and lots of trial and error with samples and tests and stuff. But really, our best lessons in turf building have come from Iceland, because the tradition there is still really quite alive. Quite a few turf buildings happening. And that tool on the bottom left is an Icelandic turf scythe. So turf is it's such a beautiful way of working, and you see these old photos, but we do have one person left in Ness that is still using a little turf shieling every summer. Well, he was a few years ago when Tom went to meet him. And Tom always says, what, you know, if that was a golden eagle, because that's how rare this guy is to be still building and living in a little turf shieling, even if it's seasonal, wouldn't we be making a big old fuss about it? But because it's a guy in a little sort of shed, we don't. So here's the Icelandic ones. I have to just show you a few, just breathtaking. And it's a great insulator. So it's, you know, it's not, a lot of old earth buildings are seen as sort of a poor person's dwelling, but in fact, historically, the people that were writing about them weren't the ones that were living in them. The normal, ordinary people generally found them really cozy, and we have an earth building here, so I can vouch for that. This is the turf walls again from Iceland. So there's this amazing exchange where we go and learn from them, and they come and learn things from us, and we sort of share our expertise. And this was a turf arch workshop where we were building a little building, and we made a turf arch, and Helge, the instructor, made this incredible formwork with a plastic barrel, some pallets, and some pieces of wood. It's like, that's true vernacular, you know, just using what you had to hand. And then carving it, like the picture on the right, he's carving it with his turf scythe, and it cuts like cheese. It's incredible. So a lot of my work over the years has been researching and then testing things. So if we have an idea, or if we've seen a fragment of it in an old building, then we'll create samples, test walls, and see how they survive. And surprisingly, sometimes they flood. And this building in Perthshire has had several floods, but it's still standing, which is extraordinary. I'm not saying this is a good thing, you know, it's remarkable how the earth, it does get wet, but then it's able to dry out again later. And often at the surface, they look really sort of cracked and a bit worn out, but they're still there after 300 years. And then you've got to think of how you're going to protect them. So sometimes it's lime on the left with a lime hull. In other places, an earth render is more appropriate. Just depends on the area. So when we want to do a repair, it's a lot about looking for the right materials, or looking for the materials that are the same as what you've got in the building. So we might use a soil map, but honestly, talking to farmers is always the best, because they just know the soil. And just here we have clay soil in one corner of one field. So it's that, you know, you have to know that to be able to use it. So, and then we'll do samples, as I said before, and make sausages and all kinds of tests that, if anyone's interested, I can direct you to this detail. But I'm keen to just get through my pictures. And then I talked about making earth bricks to do repairs with, but actually there's a lot of interest in big mass production and commercial building, in making products with earth. And whilst that's not my passion, I think there's a place for it, because if we're going to make big change in the world, we're going to need to try and get earth into all different aspects of how we work at scale or not. And I haven't really talked about how healthy earth is, but it's biodegradable, and it's completely, well, it's infinitely recyclable. That's the amazing one. It's like it just goes on and on and on. As long as you don't put any nasties in it, you can keep soaking it and using it again. And that's how we always work in an old building. We tend to take the old stuff, put it in a bath, make it wet, and off we go again forever. So although you do have to quarry it, it's once it's quarried, you can just keep using it. So here's Kevin McCabe. He just needs a mention because he's like the king of cob in Devon, and he always does things that are right on the edge. So this stair has no timber in it at all, no frame, it's just mud and straw, and it's perfectly strong. And he makes pillars, and his bike shed is better than anybody's house. So look him up. And this is us again using old methods and improvising and innovating to use them in different ways. So here we've got clay and different plants to protect a masonry vault. That was Smale Home. And more we're starting to use these old traditions in new buildings. This one just went up last year. Now this is in the garden, and if it wasn't dark, I could take you out there, but we've just had a bit of an experiment with seaweed, because we've had this notion that probably it was used in Scotland, just like it is in Scandinavia in places. And so far so good, it's holding up pretty well. We just took the most common seaweed we could find because that felt like the right thing to do. So this is us in the cottage here now, in where we live. And I've taken that idea from Kevin McCabe, and I've tried to build some stairs with mud blocks, and then we've coated it in linseed oil to give it a nice strong finish. And you can be very sculptural with the material. So this is the stair, oh, I've forgotten the word for the thing that goes down the middle of the stairs. Well, never mind, that's what it is. And it's full of building rubble because we got rid of all of our rubbish, nothing nasty, but just bricks and stuff in the middle. And then we use mud and straw for the handrail, nothing else. And then there's this whole other story about taking mud and changing it to suit different parts of a building. So if you make it into clay slip, which is like liquid clay, you can mix it with light things to make insulation. So our external wall is actually something called clay hemp, using little bits of hemp shiv, which are very light. You can make furniture with it, shelves, chairs, all kinds of things. And then we also actually, this is an old picture, but just to show different ways of putting fibre woven into frames, either covered in mud or not really, it's up to you. Sometimes earth floors sprout when you've built them because a little grass seed got in there, but it dies off and dries out, it's not a problem. So that's our earth floor. You can put heating into walls and floors, and we have in our office and in the boys' bedroom, and very good for storing heat. And now looking at some of the plasters that I've been working on, using different plants. It's nice to be very seasonal about so it's kind of like a print, that bottom left, and you can leave the plants in, you can put flowers, and but it's always nice to reflect what's going on outside. And then the bottom right is beach sand, and it's important with beach sand is really precious. So I'm not proposing you go out and quarry lots of beach sand, but just for a little touch here and there for some decorative qualities, it's nice. And here's some more examples of decorative ways of using earth. So bottom left I would and middle I would call that sgraffito, which really is just carving. So you create layers and then you cut through the top layers to reveal the bottom ones, and that's something nice you can do, because a clay plaster is quite tough, but it's still carvable, so you can have lots of fun with it. And a cob bench on top right. And then back in 2019 we were really fortunate to, well, it's almost fortunate in some ways, it was quite stressful, but we did these earth renders at the Chelsea Flower Show, one of the show gardens, and I lost a lot of sleep trying to make these renders durable, because they only had to last for like 3 weeks, but they also had to cope with very heavy rain, and there was no roofs at all. So we tried lots of different organic additives, and we did manage to make it survive. And in fact, there wasn't much rain in the end, thank goodness. And a little bit more of that clay carving in those walls. Yeah, so it is a lot about materials, and it's a lot about all the differences you get with the materials, but also it's hugely to do with people. And I'm really interested in the sort of therapeutic qualities of working with earth, and how people can really benefit. And these lovely young girls, bottom left, they came on site, and they were not really enjoying school very much. They were having problems at school, but when they got their hands in the mud, there was, for 5 minutes, they were kind of, you going, oh my God, what is this? I don't want to touch it. And then a few minutes later, they just went for it and did this incredible scene of sea creatures using mud, completely invented by themselves. So I've been doing a lot of work with sort of various groups of young people, and the other thing to mention, while I'm thinking of it, is identity is also about gender and gender in construction, which is so out of balance in so many areas, but actually in earth we're about 50% women, which is so positive. So lots of great work with women in earth construction. And community buildings with, sort of going into villages and designing things with them, and then working with volunteers to make shelters and all sorts of things. So this one's Errol Park, if anyone's in that area. Had a lot of fun there, making a really modern, quite minimal sort of shape, but again using those tool marks. And that's one of the dogs. It's not the dog that's making the noise, he's the big dog. Yeah, so that was a nice project. I think I'm nearly there, I think. Ovens, another really lovely way to work with a little group, because you can make an oven in a week or so. And pizza ovens are brilliantly suited to this sort of modern straw mix. And then this one bottom left, in fact, I just posted about this yesterday. It's like in a Berber village, and on the surface it looks like a pizza oven, but in fact they have a different way of cooking. So they heat a pile of pebbles, and then they actually cook on the pebbles. But earth itself is so good at storing heat, so it makes great ovens. And you mentioned the School of Mud, so that's when I work with children and in schools and all sorts of places. And the bottom right is in our local park in Letham, and that's the outdoor nursery there. They helped build that shelter. It's great having something that's safe enough that kids can do it, and touch it, and it's all right. So most recently I'm doing quite a lot of artwork with clay and soil now, and these are just to show some experiments with different trowels and prints. And we did some plasters in Tom's office, and there's Tom putting it. It's a very dense, not a sort of fibrous plaster, which is brilliant for acoustics, so you also get that benefit. And it balances humidity, so if you have it in a bathroom, you don't get any condensation. There's so many sort of ways you can use it. And these are the Dorodango. I don't know if some of you have seen these. It's just soil that's polished to a shine. And the way it works is that clay molecules are teeny weeny and very flat. And when you polish them with something shiny like glass, they all go in a beautiful flat kind of structure that reflects light. So that's what they are. Now, I'm not going to read this, and I'm practically done, but I'm going to put this on my website, because I had this challenge to build an entire course about earth building and transformation with a small clay ball. And I sort of set myself this challenge, and this is what I came up with, is how you can learn so much from something so small. So you can maybe go and have a look at that. I'll put it on the blog in the next day or two. So that's a quick whiz through my work. But if you want to follow me, there's a couple of places. I'm on Facebook too. But I'm really happy to answer any questions and have a talk to anyone that's got anything they want to say. Okay, should I stop sharing now? Would that be the thing?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Becky. That was
Oh, you're welcome.
really
Feel like
interesting.
I
Yeah.
galloped through.
And it was a bit of a snapshot, not of your identity, but also indicating how buildings can have an identity of their own as well. I think that's
Yeah.
lovely. It's not
Yeah.
just about the individuals who make it, but the building itself comes to life as you're
Yeah.
making it as well.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. We'll go into the Padlet, but I'll start off by asking a question that I had quite a lot of questions, but I'll have to pick one. So how do you feel the identity of the material itself is maybe portrayed still negatively currently, or do you feel like there's a change in the identity of clay itself in the construction industry?
I think there is quite a big change happening just now. And I tell you where the biggest change I see is in clay plasters, because clay plasters have become quite aspirational, and largely due to the work of Clayworks, which is this really great company based in Cornwall that have made a beautiful range of clay finishes. And they are working in department stores, hotels, a lot in London, but there's a few in Scotland too. And on one hand, that's kind of like, oh, well, that's not in my house, but equally it's showing people what's possible. And so I think, yeah, it's making it more high status. So that's definitely an area where things are changing. I think there still is a perception, though, that if you live in an earth building, it's going to be a bit of a hovel. I think that stigma is still out there, but we're working on it. And Grand Designs has done quite a bit of good work in that area too, because they tend to show quite a lot of earth now. So I think things are shifting in this country, but in other countries in the world, well, there can be still, in that place where they're just building concrete everywhere and don't really recognize the value of what they have. So we've a way to go. I mean, we've been saying that Earth's going to be the next big thing for 25 years. So but then the plasters, it has really moved on. So that's definitely progress. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yes,
Does anyone else
absolutely.
have an answer?
I'll open up the Padlet and see. I'll share that, because there might be more questions there as well. Okay, I'll start with the first one for you, maybe. There's a certain intimacy between the land and the homes and structures produced with it. How does your work and that of your predecessors, who have historically used that method of building, reinforce the identities of places, along with the strong cultural and physical relationship with nature?
Oh, that's a big old question, isn't it? Well, I guess, I mean, I'm just, as you probably realize, I'm so interested in the diversity of what is out there, and I want to maintain that diversity or even increase it, to be honest, because I think some things get lost. So so I'll take a little example. Sorry if I'm not answering it just as you want, but the cob example, and remember I gave you that list of cob and the different names. But what I'm seeing with cob globally is it's becoming generic and similar and the same everywhere to some degree. And I'm kind of somebody that's always saying, but wait, don't you remember that the clay dabbins in Cumbria is in really thin layers, and it's got this kind of straw, and then the mud in Ireland is done slightly different. I'm sort of always kind of wanting to shout out the differences, because for me difference is very exciting and very it's just a wonderful thing to live with difference. So I'm always encouraging that we keep those differences or we refine them. But having said all that, you saw that example where the sod or turf builders from Scotland took their material to Nebraska and it became something else. So it's also about having a bit of freedom for things to change. as long as everything doesn't become the same, I think that's the critical thing.
Do you think that's because it tends to be in a way, in order to introduce maybe sustainable materials, you have to move towards maybe unsustainable methods of making in the process. There's maybe a conflict there between like standardization and uniformity and making something sustainable also more commercial, I suppose.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's a conflict. But if we wait for everyone to hand make their own buildings from the soil in their gardens, I think we're going to be too late. So I think we have to have, you know, the handmade sort of self-build is really important, and it gives great example of what's possible. But I actually think we also need to be producing products and blocks and other things in factories as well. I think we have to sort of work on both levels for now anyway. Of course, climate may beat us and make us have to return to sort of using soil ourselves if things get really difficult, but we're not quite there yet.
Great. I'll maybe move on to the next and see here. So the reinvention of the vernacular appears to currently focus on the physical reinterpretation of old forms, rather than looking at incorporating or being inspired by the social processes of making that shaped the spaces. Your work reintroduces this focus on the process into the art of constructing and designing the built environment. How do you see that being appreciated better and translated into other parts of the construction industry?
Wow, these questions. Can you just remember, guys, I'm a builder. No, sorry, it's brilliant. It's great to see people really thinking about it. Well, I'll try and think about it. You saw that building in Errol, and we very strongly wanted to have a simple, quite modern form. And actually, aesthetically, I love that. Because when you keep things simple, the materials really sing. You know, there lots of people love making incredibly embellished kind of Gothic, you know, dragons and trees and all kinds of sort of incredible things with earth. And I'm not, you know, that's great, but I love really simple modern forms and shapes, because then I can see that the clay has got little bits of, you know, coloured stones in it. I can see what kind of plants in it. I can see the quality of the materials much better in those simple shapes. So I think that's an aesthetic answer. But you know, a lot of my work is kind of this co-creation process, and you've just got to try and weave a way through all the different interests and wants of the group, because you're going to have some people that want to do a tree made of mud, and other people are going to want to make something look very, you know, old-fashioned. So you're just treading a delicate line really whenever you work with other people. But I really enjoy doing that. Do you remember the plasters in Tom's office? I mean, that's a big, it's an old building, but it's got a very modern feel inside, very flat walls. And oh, it's so wonderful making fabulous texture on flat walls, because it just really shows that off in a way that something more busy just wouldn't. I'm really not sure I've answered every bit of that incredibly intelligent question. I'm kind of reading it again. Yeah, well, I guess there is a thing then about, I do notice this when I share these more modern looking things, then different parts of the industry do appreciate that and like that, and especially, you know, architects always prefer it if we do things quite slick. So yeah. And again, then the rest of the construction industry might see it as something quite cool to follow. There's this interesting thing going on, like I was talking about plasters. There's this whole fashion for concrete finishes, but they're not concrete, they're made of clay. So you can be really clever with clay. You can sort of pretend it to be all sorts of things. You can make it look like timber, you can make it look, you know, it's fakery, but it's quite clever fakery, and I don't mind that actually. Fair enough. If you're using something super healthy to make something look like concrete, then fine, because you're not creating massive carbon problems if you do that. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. And I hopefully people can come into the Padlet as well and see the shared link that I put into the chat, and just add your comments if you have any more.
Sorry, excuse me. I can't see the Padlet.
Okay, right.
Oh.
I wasn't sure.
Hi, Becky.
I'll resend it.
I'd just like to ask on the turf, actually. So I work with clay as well, and I follow you, Becky. I'm Cogmon. And so I just want to know, the turf looks really clayish. The turf.
Yes, that's a good. So sometimes it really is clay, and other times hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, more often it's not clay, you know, or like 5%. And sometimes it's almost peat, like peat. So again, quite a lot of variety, but the strongest turf wall I ever worked on and the most durable was very rich clay turf. So it was almost like adobe blocks, where the roots are giving you the reinforcement instead of the straw. So you can make beautiful buildings with clay turf blocks if that's what you have, which, you know, if you have a cob building and you need to clear the ground of some clay turf, then yeah, dig it up and use it, because it's great.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
And I would, if I do have time, I'd love to ask another question about those arches, or not the arches, the, what do you call them, columns?
Like the pillars.
Yeah, like, was that pure clay, or was there something in that, like timber underneath?
Just a cob mix, and
Wow.
then using like like the big 20-litre white buckets, taking the one end off and just using it as a formwork.
Brilliant.
Just like that.
Cool. With straw, with
And
fiber
I mean that,
instead?
just like a normal cob mix, you know, soil and fiber.
Cool, that's amazing. Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And carrying that massive roof load.
Yeah, so it's structural, like.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Really good.
Okay, yeah. There are my 2 questions. Thank you. I can't see the chat, that's why I can't.
That's good.
Yeah, please feel free to also ask questions aloud. That's absolutely fine. It's great. Actually, we love it. So if you have more questions, go for it. And yeah, if anyone else has something they would rather say themselves aloud, go ahead. So the next question on here is, how do you feel about the lack of awareness or exposure of the methods you use that are historically ingrained and part of Scottish cultural heritage in architectural education or in the industry in general?
God, these questions are amazing. So my instinct there is, well, obviously there's a lot, again, as I said, there's a long way to go, but we did have a really good experience in the project in Errol, where we went in and we were part of a landscape partnership project. So it gave us the opportunity to work with the school, the primary school, and we were in just about every class teaching the kids about earth building. Now, I don't know if you know, but Errol is like the mud capital of Scotland. You know, the whole of the high street in Errol is made of mud. And lots of people, even in the village, didn't know this. So again, it's this business of it's so hidden that folk just have no idea it's there, or they think it's very strange and just one building, but it was very, very common in that area. And so over 3 years, we managed to really get involved with the community, and really the best way of reaching the adults is through the kids, because if they get excited, then they drag their parents in, and then they learn about it too. And by the end of that three-year project, I mean, we had a very lively bunch of volunteers that built that shelter in the park. But I would say the village as a whole, it felt to me like they were quite proud of it. And at the back right at the back end, we had this festival called Clayfest, which I strongly encourage you all to keep an eye out for it next year, because it's a yearly thing. And Clayfest that year, it was a week-long event where we ran workshops in the park in Errol. And we had earth builders from all over the world came. And so again, the local people were like, wow, this is like a thing, and it's global, and everyone got talking. And I was really worried that we'd have sort of a culture clash, but honestly, it was great. Everyone got on, and the earth builders were in the pub, and we were, you know, sitting around in the sunshine chatting, and it was like some brilliant cultural event. So I think we can do a lot to educate people and change attitudes, and it's that kind of thing. But getting to sort of the wider construction industry is a bit more hard work, if I'm honest. But yeah, we try.
I find it interesting because I've kind of learned about the spread of it through like looking at your work. I didn't really realize how common it was historically. And that's after spending 6 years in architectural education, like not really talking about that part of Scottish architecture.
Yeah. I'd love to go into architecture schools and teach about this. And we did in the past, but times are hard and funds are low and all of that. But I strongly urge all of you that are interested to join Earth Building UK and Ireland. It's called eBucky. Maybe we could put the link to that in somewhere, because Clayfest is our annual gathering, but we just did a virtual Clayfest last week and it was brilliant. We'd never done that before, so we had 2 days of this sort of thing and lots of discussion and from people from all over the world. So that's a good way to find out more. But for those of you that don't know anything, it's like 1/3 of the world's population live in earth buildings. So that's quite a lot, really, isn't it? And I bet it's more than that.
On that response, Becky, do you think that architects also play a role in like maybe specifying it or introducing it to their clients as a material? Do you think there's a big part in that?
I think that would be brilliant. Yeah, the more architects that know about it and know how to use it, the better. And if they've got an ability to explain it and give evidence to whoever they need to, building regs and planning, and it's we've got to get in every part of the industry. It's no good just a few builders knowing how. It's building professionals, it's the public, so that they know it's an option. It's all parts of the market. Yeah. And actually in some parts of Europe it is much more it's out there, you know, like next week I'm doing a lecture for a base habitat, which is at the University of Linz, and they are huge proponents of earth and fibre in buildings. And in France, a lot more activity of students in universities with doing earth building, both theory and practice. So we are a little bit behind, I think, in some ways. Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask the next question. Do you think there's going to be a return to earth structures and vernacular in general? Could earth be the material of the future? Thank you so much.
Oh, I really hope so. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I mean, in a way, we're going to have to get quite radical, aren't we? Because things are, you know, with climate change especially, and biodiversity and all these other, we've got so many crises. I don't know how to say the word crises, whatever the word is. Earth is a real practical solution to shelter could make a big difference and can be done at a scale. You saw my digger, and you know, in 2 hours I could mix 50 tons. I mean, that's quite a big scale. And Kevin McCabe can build using diggers very quickly. So there are ways to scale it up as well as do it by hand. So fingers crossed. Yeah, I'm optimistic.
When people think of structures, though, I think looking towards the future, they like to think there's a lot of longevity in the structure. And I wanted to ask you that about clay and working with mud. Is there a lot of maintenance involved? Because we have such an attitude of not wanting to maintain our buildings or the structure or the material.
Yeah, it is. It's tricky because people do perceive it as something that's going to need a lot of work. So if you do a really good design and you get your details right, that's huge. That's the biggest thing. And then the next biggest thing is that simple thing of like that, you saw that gutter, that block gutter that had dripped for a while. It's looking after your rainwater goods. But to be honest, that's the same for any building. You need to look after those details. But if you do those two things, and if you keep the surface of it in good condition, then it can last for hundreds. It probably could last for thousands of years, actually, if you kept maintaining, if you redid the roof. But there is a cultural thing where we want to put on a coating of something and just walk away and never have to think about it again. And that's a huge problem. And we've got to do something about that, because the way an earth building responds best is if you do a little bit now and again. So, and I would say this about masonry and lime and all these other things. So every spring, maybe for half a day, you pull out your bucket of mud and you patch that little corner that gets the rain from the southwest, and you spend 2 hours putting a little bit more mud on it, and then it's done till the following spring. It's really minimal, but yeah, people don't like to do it much, which is a shame. But whenever we work on an old building, we try and get the house owner involved and teach them how to do that, and leave behind some mix so that they can. But the beautiful thing is they can do it, because it's not, cement that's going to burn them or it's technically quite simple to do. So it's accessible, but you've got to have a mindset that's willing to put in a few hours here and there. Yeah.
So if you specify, you maybe need to still have the client on board as well, like looking at it from an architect's perspective. Like you need to, like, yeah.
Like a clay plaster. Like we got clay plasters everywhere here, and we've got teenagers and dogs. So every now and again, not often actually, somebody will hit the wall with something hard, like I don't know what, like a stick or something, and a little bit of clay will come out. Actually, the same would probably happen with lime. But the beautiful thing is, it's a 5-minute fix. You damp it a little bit and you put some clay back, and it's like if I've just spent 5 minutes with someone showing them how to do that, they're going to be able to do it. So
I think it's something Kiki touched on your introduction, bringing uncertainty back into construction, because like to fix that little bit of wall, it takes a certain element of confidence that maybe people should have more in their environments, their architectural environments, in their spaces. So that's nice.
And the other thing to say is, again, we were talking about the building telling you what it needs, but you see with these old walls, especially outside, if something's damp, you kind of see it. It's really visible. It's not hidden, because the color changes. And if you've got that gutter thing happening, you see, the problem with that gutter that I talked about is it was covered in a very dense cement render. You couldn't see the problem. It was concealed. But if I've got an earth wall with a dribble, I see it, so I can fix it.
I think that kind of ties into the next question, actually, about like learning to do things yourself. Someone's saying, thank you so much for such a beautiful talk. I was wondering if you know of any programs to get involved in such projects. So maybe to learn yourself.
Practical learning. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm assuming so. If the person who wrote this wants to clarify that, you can go ahead and vocalize it.
So obviously this year we've had to just postpone all hands-on training, but next year we will start again, and I'm planning to do some kind of socially distanced stuff if necessary. So yes, I just get in touch with me and let me know that you're interested. And we've done we do a few courses every year, and now we've got the seaweed kind of shelter in the garden. I can do some small ones there. So absolutely, there will be stuff going on. With or without COVID, we'll do some courses next year.
Amazing.
I see somebody asking about the upper floor there.
Yeah,
that's a good question. So that was an upper floor, and Kester, that's so I don't know, you weren't here at the beginning, but my partner Tom is an architect who is very experienced with earth. So in fact, we don't really have problems in that he knows the material, but we did have big, strong oak beams below, and it's within an oak frame. So it is quite a bulky structure. But the upper floor is about 4 inches of earth being suspended on timber boarding. But no clashes with regs and engineers. I think, again, if you know your subject and you know you have some evidence to draw on, it shouldn't be a problem, but it sometimes is, but it shouldn't be.
It's just to respond to that, it's really inspiring to see that when you see something like that, it's just totally possible to do. And not be a problem, because I think that would be something that might put architects off, might put consumers or self-builders off. There's like, oh, well, it is possible, but you have to know so much. You have to have so much expertise. But to see that it's possible with help, obviously, and with knowledge, that it can be legitimate, like properly. It's not wacky.
No, it's not wacky, and there's plenty of people out there with good earth floors now. That's quite, I wouldn't say it's commonplace, but there's plenty of good projects to draw on. And I would urge you to get stuck into the network of Earth Building UK and Ireland, because you can always find someone in your area using that network. And actually, another really good resource is Talking Natural Homes. I don't know if any of you are plugged into that Facebook group.
I think that's here.
Yeah. Honestly, there's some great stuff in there. So you can search by subject. So if you wanted to know about earth floors, you just stick that in the search, and up comes reams and reams of great discussion. And there's a lot of good quality material. Not all, but some really good experts using that forum. So yeah, that's a good place to go.
Okay, great. I think that was the last question.
Could I ask?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna ask. So I'm studying with Kat at the moment, and I'm not an architect, but I work with Cobb, and I just see, like, I'm from Wexford, Becky, where you've been, I think, with Clayfest, and like we just have this amazing vernacular architecture, and I wonder, why does no one put in plans for a house to just re-establish that, which kind of drew on facing the house towards the sun. It knew how the climate worked in an area, and I just wonder why we're all trying to it's a bit abstract, so I'm sorry, it's kind of, but it's a discussion point more, but it's like, why do we try to just kind of monoculturalize our houses? When the plan is there.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think if I put in plans for a patch, it would be accepted?
I don't know the Irish scene well enough, to be honest, to know how easy that would be. But I'm afraid it's to do with money, isn't it? Money and power is why we have a monoculture of anything. But yeah, there shouldn't be any reason why you can't put a design in that's cob and beautifully traditional. Are you presumably Fela and Colin of Mud and Wood?
I do, familiar? Yeah. Because I've worked with Fela before for Heart. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they won prizes for their amazing cob building. It was on it was on the television, and you would have thought that would have helped things along a bit, because it was traditional, but it was also really using passive solar and lots of more high-tech ways of working with cob. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the Irish planning scene well enough.
Yeah,
but I have been to Ireland and seen a lot of real monstrosities. Yeah.
If it meets the building regs, and it's up to the standards of the planners, I think it can pass. they do tend to be, in the UK as well as Ireland, more sensitive in rural areas, which is the area in which you would find these buildings predominantly. So in regards to the style of the house, yeah, they would be a little bit more strict naturally.
Okay, so by more sensitive, you mean more strict to not allow vernacular in a rural area?
No, to, in my opinion, allow probably a very uninformed opinion of what the vernacular is. So
yeah, this is it. Okay,
yes,
thanks guys. Sorry. Yeah.
Geraldine, I'll post something on the resources. It's an eco village that's from Midlands in Ireland, and they have
Jordan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Okay, brilliant though. Thanks. Any resources, welcome. Thank you. Sorry, it's like very abstract.
I think it's about getting the conversation started as well, because obviously councils vary, but I know with my practice you can sort of phone up and make an inquiry and speak to a planner, and it might just be getting the knowledge across and getting people interested, and then before you know it, you'll be able to put in your plans and people will be more aware of cob buildings. And yeah.
So I've got an architect here. Come on. Come and join us, Tom. What about Geraldine, who's in Ireland, was asking about how easy, how difficult it is to get a cob building through planning. What's your experience as a Fife architect with earth buildings and getting through the regs and all that?
I mean, planning are just concerned with what a building looks like on the outside, and you can make a earth building look more or less whatever you like on the outside. And with the regs, if you know what you're doing, you'll know more than the building control officer, and so you can satisfy them, because there's plenty of precedent out there, or you can give them German DIN standards or things that look impressive, but they don't necessarily understand technically. And as long as you sound like you know more than they do, they'll nod it through. The other thing you can do is you can use, technically in the regs, you can use a traditional form of construction. And most of these forms are traditional forms of construction. They might not have been used for 200 years, but there's historic Scotland documents that show it's a tradition. And so you're just using a traditional form. The main problem comes with achieving thermal insulation standards. And there's a whole thing about SAP calculations and dynamic
values,
flows and so on. But, and that's where in our practice, we tend to use light earth for the outside and denser earth on the inside for thermal mass and acoustic insulation. So
you mean light straw clay?
Light straw clay, or even just a straw outer envelope or cellulose.
And the clay hemp was in the slides. That's what's in the house, but that's the same as straw clay.
I think that's where a lot of the interest in research and development work's going on, about how to use these materials, in sprays or in prefabrication. And, just finding the most efficient way to use it in modern construction, so that it can become a modern vernacular, cheap and easy to use for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's the thing though, it's really, because I'm like, okay, these buildings existed and they're still standing 200 years later. So why aren't we using those plans? Like, that's just,
Well, but people live differently now than they did then.
Yeah, this is
different expectations, and they're taller. And we've got an aging society. There are things that are different, and we've got a lot more services. We heat our buildings more, and we ventilate them less, and
we're there less.
It's a different era, and some of that we have to recover older ways of living. But it's kind of going forwards, looking backwards, or
more working from home though now, maybe. So maybe
the homes become more important because they're also a work environment. People spend more time there, and if we all live in small, poorly ventilated, chemically emitting environments, we're all just going to get iller and iller. So in Germany, the Earth Revival was led by using clay plasters to rehabilitate concrete buildings from the 50s and 60s. that's really what made it a commercially viable enterprise. And I think you can see some of the same with the buildings we're throwing up now that are full of Kingspan insulation and toxic chemicals, that in 20 years people will realise we've got all these people falling ill from that, and we need to plaster them with clay on the inside. You know, I think that agenda will work its way through in the next 10 years or so.
Here's hoping. Yeah, full circle.
Yeah, but just to say to Geraldine there, I would never build a cob house in Scotland, actually, because it probably would be quite cold. But we've got plenty, well, I know, but we've got plenty cob, or mudwall as we call it, internally here.
Yeah.
Or around a heat source, or as a radiator, or, you know.
So yeah, and if fires are, sorry for putting it.
They're worried about vandalism.
Yeah, good for shelters because cars can't knock it over.
But then if they don't allow like an open fire anymore as well, then a cob house isn't really going to work as well, no? Or...
Do you know, if you really want a cob house, you should bloody well build a cob house. And through the regs, you just will, because there's always a way.
I will.
It's just, you know.
And they do perform. They perform way better than, you know, what the numbers tell you. Yeah, everyone says that, and I know that from being in them. But
yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I think we'll have to round it off now, so that everyone can go and have their dinners if they want to as well, or maybe a glass of wine on the early Friday. So yeah, but yeah, it's been really interesting. And thank you so much for taking a bit of your Thursday evening to share a bit of your knowledge, Becky.
You're welcome.
And we'll have our final discussion series session next week, and people are more than welcome to join then. And that will be with just ISM, so it will just be a discussion session with us, and it will be focusing on the next issue, really. So if anyone's wanting to join, then come along next week. So I'll stop sharing here, and just like to say thank you very much, and hope you have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.